it's a pleasure to host this webinar today. It's the second one in the series. So we've got a number of webinars to come. I'm really excited about today's session, and as I was just talking to the presenters before we all arrived, it's an absolute pleasure to be presenting something on an element of student communication that we very rarely discuss, or we very rarely have the time to fit into our curriculum. We know that student communication, we typically focus on things like, oral communication, vivas, scenarios, labs, and then in written communication and perhaps poster presentations. But we very, very rarely discuss about those, interrelation communications, perhaps via phone calls. And I'm sure many of us also now very rarely choose the phone call as our first port of call to contact someone. And so it's just a skill, but it's something that also takes confidence. And so I'm sure we will all be learning a bit about that today, and how we can help our students to utilize that. So a little bit about the awards. So for those of you who don't know much about the Teaching Innovation Awards, so this is a series of awards. We've been running this for a few years now, and we aim to celebrate not just partners who work with us and utilize LearnSci resources, but also those that are external to the company and showcase just really excellent innovation in utilizing digital resources to support students and staff in their teaching and learning strategies. And so we're really keen to support anyone, and as a company we work really hard to support and sort of sing the praises of anyone who leans into utilizing digital resources for students and staff. So I'm really excited for this talk. We've got a number of talks to come, as I've mentioned, and I'll put a slide up at the end for you to remind you of who's coming down the line in the next couple of weeks. Just a few housekeeping rules then, please. If you can, keep your microphones off. We will be recording the session, so please feel free to ask questions at the end. It'd be great if you can think of some questions to ask. You can use the hand, you can put your hand up, or if you don't wish to talk or have have yourself on camera, please just use the chat function, which you'll find on the bottom right hand side of the Google Meet window. Click on the chat. We'll be patrolling the chat, and we will pass your questions on to the presenters. I think that's all really that I need to discuss. If you are interested in the Teaching Innovation Awards and you would like to have a look at the past winners and the applicants of the awards, please go to our website and have a look at that. I honestly will tell you, you will be inspired by something. And one of the excellent areas of the awards that I know I lean into is we try to showcase applicants that can help with real practical, innovative changes that are accessible to us as practitioners. And so most of the time we will present and support winners who have provided real tangible results that are really manageable, that we could learn from. So go and have a look, and hopefully you will be inspired. Also, if you're interested in collaborating with us for educational research, please check that out as well. Some of the applicants that that are our partners, we also support them in educational research to either take their projects one step further, or actually to help with some of the early ideas around some of these projects. And so please have a look at that. So that's enough from me. So thank you again for those of you that are here, and for those of you that are watching this as a recording, hopefully we'll have covered some of the questions that you might have had pop up in your mind. But if not, please feel free to reach out to the presenters or to ourselves, and we can pass you details on. And so that's enough for me, and I will now pass over to Kathleen and Jim. Thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. So I suppose a quick introduction on who we are. So I'm Kathleen. I'm a teaching associate at Aston University, and I'm also part of the placement role. So I'm with the NHS placements. I help lead the tutor role for that.
And my name's Jim Heritage. I'm the careers consultant from our careers placements team, but I am linked with health and life science subject areas. So if there's an ology at the end of it or a science at the end of it, it's generally me who works very closely with academics and our students then to hopefully get them to graduate destinations and hopefully into careers that are relevant to their aspirations.
So our talk today, as if you've seen online, is to do with improving phone call communication. So our particular project looks more at biomedical science students, the ones going into the NHS as trainee biomedical scientists. So if I move on. So what we're going to go through is a brief overview of the project. So why are we doing it? How have we managed to do it? What so far in terms of results and impact have we seen? And what are our future plans? There will of course be time for a Q&A and then a quick wrap up and a goodbye. So hopefully you enjoy. So for a brief introduction, as I think I was speaking before we started, telephones are used every day, particularly within a hospital. It could be other healthcares speaking to each other, but particularly in a lab, it can be for phoning in samples, querying details of patients or samples that have come in, and even reporting results to GPs, doctors, all sorts of different people. So the phone is going off constantly. So we are constantly, as biomedical scientists, having to answer the phone and speak to a lot of different people. Sometimes that can even be patients. It is rare, but it does happen. What we have found though, and particularly there's a few studies that we will kind of briefly touch upon, is that nowadays the new kind of generation does not use their phones in the same way we used to. They will use texts, they will use emails, they will use voice messages, but they, however, don't really use phone calls. They're not phoning their parents like a lot of people used to. They're not phoning employers, phoning companies, things like that. So that can lead to a lot of anxiety around phone calls. The fact your phone's ringing and you might not know who it is. Do the students know how to even address someone, how to start a conversation, or how to keep it going, perhaps in a phone call? So as I mentioned, there is a lot of different studies on this, and these are just a few kind of articles that I've come across over the last few years about how students' communication preferences are starting to change. A particularly interesting one by Uswitch, which of course is kind of a company to do with phones themselves. They saw that almost a quarter of younger people, so age 18 to 34, found that actually they wouldn't pick up the phone because they were worried that, you know, they didn't know who they were speaking to. It was out of the blue. They weren't sure what kind of news it might be. So it made a sense of anxiety around it, or what's called telephobia. So they just didn't really want to answer the phone, so they would ignore it. And obviously some of that can be to do with spam calls and things like that. But obviously generally it is just that they don't use the phones anymore the way we used to. You can see other articles here as well. So Nottingham College has actually looked at training students, so training their kind of college students to start using their phones in a more professional manner, understanding how employers might be calling them. And the same way the conversation actually said that students not using their phones the same way we used to could actually be hurting their chances of employability, because they might not answer the call if someone's saying, hey, you've got an interview or you've actually got the job. They might not answer it unless it comes via an email. And that obviously could be quite detrimental to their career.
Yeah, particularly from an employability perspective, this is quite a big area where students are screening calls or avoiding the use of telephone. As Kathleen already said, really is really kind of putting them at risk of losing out on opportunities, but then also actually when facing workplaces where telephone calls are really an essential part of that, really potentially at a disadvantage compared to other candidates than others. So it's really important that we're kind of focusing our efforts on really getting that preparation in place ready for them to join that workforce.
Yeah. So when we started this activity, we wanted to release a survey. So the activity itself we will talk about in a moment, but we just wanted to get a general feel as to what students felt about phone calls. So we found that quite a lot of them did answer the phone. However, still there was quite a few that do not. And the reason became apparent was things like avoiding it if it was an unknown number, in case it was just something like spam, they weren't sure how to deal with it, or just having their phone generally on silent, which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to having. There was definitely a difference when I asked them if their opinions changed of phone calls, if it became a professional phone call rather than a personal one. So instead of answering the call for a friend, it now might be an employer or their university. A lot of them said they would no longer feel comfortable actually answering or dealing with a phone call themselves. 71% of them as well felt uncomfortable about sudden, unexpected phone calls, which I can certainly relate to. And a lot of them, as we've mentioned, prefer texting and emailing because that has become a much more normal way to speak to people rather than calling them. We did lastly ask students why they'd want to do the activity. Some of them obviously spoke about the fact that it was kind of asked of them for their placement in order to help their development, but a lot of them just generally talked about the desire to improve their professional communication and try to reduce what anxiety they already had about phone calls. So just a couple little results from the survey that we did. So this is just showing again that a lot of them talked about the fact their phones were on silent, so they would miss a lot of calls, which obviously is quite common, but obviously is risky if it is something like a job opportunity. You can obviously see the varies do change, with not a lot of them being about anxiety, but still showing that some of them do still feel that, along with just generally not knowing what to do if it's an unknown call or a spam call, for example. So there is still kind of quite a few variables that students think about. And obviously I did put another box there that no one used, but I'm sure there is a lot of reasons students might be able to think about as to why they wouldn't answer a phone call. And again, we had a kind of strongly agree to disagree some statements, which you'll see a comparison of later post-survey. But you can see quite a lot of students, again, just prefer to text and email over calling someone, whether that is professionally or generally. I asked them to consider both versions. And I think that again shows there is such a change in how students nowadays use their phones or using communication over email and text. And even within emails, I'm sure a lot of academics can agree that even over email, they are not always professional either. And that could again be hurting their chances of employability if they are not able to put themselves across clearly and professionally to employers. Is there anything you want to add on that, Jim?
No, I think particularly for me with the industries for this student group, particularly within the scientific world, is that it is so important that we're encouraging students to use all various different areas to help them to get job vacancies and to find employers. And I think particularly working in partnership with recruiters who depend a lot on telephone communication to screen candidates, I think that really does put people at a disadvantage. But I think they need to have the confidence that somebody can deal with telephone inquiries within a laboratory environment and be able to communicate effectively within that. And those things are a demonstration of of their abilities while having those pre-screening calls. So the fact that students are just feeling anxious to the point of not able to engage in those kind of conversations is definitely a concern for me.
Something I did put in this as well that I'll just briefly touch upon, which is more to do with obviously the laboratory side, is their understanding of who might be phoning and obviously what they can talk about to people on the phone. And you can see that a lot of them do generally agree, they kind of understand what they would be able to talk about, but there is still quite a few that overall do not know what queries they might get when in a hospital setting. So this activity, as well as obviously generally trying to improve their communication and reduce the anxiety around phone calls, it was also to show them as a biomedical scientist who might be phoning the lab, what they might be asking, and obviously what all sorts of queries you might be getting to help them feel a little bit more prepared for the placement as well. So if we delve a bit more into the how this activity actually works. So this activity was a formative assessment, so there was no grades around it to hopefully ease any anxiety that students may have about an assessment or an activity in general. The word can kind of be a bit taboo around students. But what it is an online activity that they could do in their own time, which allowed them to practice communication skills and start to understand how communication is used in a hospital within phone calls. They were also asked to complete a post-activity survey, which we will delve into a little bit later, to see whether this activity did help them, what they overall felt it improved about their skills, communication, and things like that, but also what else they would want to see in the activity if it kept running in the future, because it's always good to gauge what they felt went well, but also what didn't work as well, so what we could act upon and what we could continue to improve in the activity to keep pushing it further. The software we used was Interview 360, which we'll delve a bit into in a moment, and they had 3 scenarios to go through, which we will also delve into in a moment. Did you want to talk a bit about this, Jim?
Yeah, so Interview 360 is a platform which we've had for a number of years. It's been used by many universities. It's now operated through the Access Group. It's a system which basically allows us to create digital interviews. We create our own questions, which then the students can then log on to and then practice their skills using their webcam. The question pops up like it would an employer's pre-screening interview or a digital interview of some kind, and then you have a moment of thinking, and then you go straight into a recording where it starts recording a response, and then interestingly then those responses get saved, and then there's some feedback opportunity, and students then are able to actually forward their responses to a tutor or a careers person to help to review their responses and things as well. So it's been well used across our university with courses and within assessments, and although this is using it in a very completely different way that wasn't really planned for, it's kind of used it used it in a very nice way where it was kind of a text response where somebody could read the scenario and then automatically then kind of give a response which would then be recorded. Students have an option to be able to turn off their webcam because it's as a telephone call, so you won't be able to see somebody. So they've got that bit of reassurance if they didn't want to do that. But I think what was nice about it was that it added a nice little degree of pressure in a kind of a real world kind of scenario, that there's a response required immediately, and so they had a moment to think, but then they had to kind of give that response straight away there as well. So we were adapting it from its original purpose there, but it seems to have worked really well, and I think kind of with the functionality of a lot of these systems, I think it's replicatable across a lot of these kind of interview-based systems that most universities would tend to have now as well.
Thank you. So if we move on to kind of a brief explanation of each scenario. So as I said, there was 3 scenarios in total. Each, you could say, kind of have levels, so from easy to harder. But in a hospital, obviously, these can be of varying degrees depending what's being asked. So with scenario 1, it was a GP. So this is what the students would see, is they would be told they've received a phone call from a local GP inquiring about some patient results. They haven't yet had them through by the normal means. So what would you need to do as a biomedical scientist to help them? So obviously we showed a kind of a speech bubbles there to say, this is how the phone's been answered. So someone said, hello, who am I? This is what I'm looking for. Can you help me?
It was purposely decided to try and keep that as a natural text response, as if somebody was actually answering the call, rather than the more detailed explanation of the scenario, just to make it a little bit more real life, kind of as a phone call would be.
The students were told as well that they could either answer it as if they were answering the phone call themselves, or they could explain what they would do. I left that up to the student, and obviously if they had questions, they could come and speak to me. We'll talk a little bit about what the feedback was afterwards. But this would be one of, I'm going to say a simpler query that might come into the hospital, but this is one of our most common ones, is that a patient might be phoning up a GP, harassing them, for lack of a better word, asking about results, asking when they'll be. So they then would phone the pathology lab. In my case, obviously it was biochemistry, but it could be any department, to ask, can we get these results? Have they actually come through yet? We haven't received them via email, or rarely via mail. Does sometimes still happen, as much as the postal service isn't used anymore. So we move on to scenario 2. So this time you could say this is more a medium level, if you will. So this is a doctor that's phoned that wants to add a sample onto a patient's, onto a patient's sample that was already taken earlier in the day. What we tried to convey in this one was maybe a bit of frustration. Obviously, any healthcare worker is very busy, as the NHS is struggling, short-staffed, a lot of people to go through. So at times, people who are on the phone can be quite frustrated. They can already be knee-deep in quite a lot of work. And of course, having to phone you has become a little bit of an inconvenience for them. So what I want them to obviously think about in this case is we've tried to convey within the speech that they're a bit like, well, I don't know why I have to do this, but I'm phoning, so I may as well ask for the information now. This does come in quite a lot as well. So samples can be taken, and then later on they might phone to say, can I add something else to this? The main thing to think about, that the students need to think about this one, is consent. Is obviously we can have someone phone up and ask for extra tests, but we do not know if the patient has consented to that. So this is where the students might need to think about what additional things might they need to ask about first, or what additional paperwork might they need before they can process that next test if the sample is still usable.
I think what's nice about this scenario as well is that you've got that additional level of that doctor's frustration to have to also navigate as well. Is that, how do you respond to that in a way that's professional, but is also still kind of you know, keeping that relationship between the lab and this doctor, who is clearly a little bit stressy at this point.
Yeah. And if we move on to the last scenario, so this is actually a patient that is phoned, that is asking for some results, or is asking for a family member's results, depending how the student wanted to take it. They've been told that by their GP that they could phone it and get results. Could we help them? This does happen more than you think it would. GPs don't necessarily give out our numbers, but they will probably tell the patients where to find them, which is a Google. And a lot of the time this navigating is very tricky. And this is why I would say this is probably one of the more harder queries that we get in a hospital, because you're trying to tell a patient that you cannot help them. And that's something the students would have to navigate, is that as a biomedical scientist, we are not allowed to give results to patients directly. It has to go to their GP, their consultant, their doctor, and they are the ones that give results. That's why the role as a biomedical scientist is quite an unknown role to the general public at times, because we work very much in the background. We do not really directly speak with patients very often. We do not give results out to them directly. So this is a bit of a trickier one to navigate for students. So it's getting them to think about, well, being professional, but being polite, being empathetic to a patient that might be quite stressed, particularly obviously if this is a mother trying to get results for a daughter who might be quite unwell. They might already be quite stressed and upset. So it's trying to deal with that calmly, but professionally, and let them know that obviously you cannot help them, but try and explain clearly the next steps that they could do in order to get results. Did you want to add anything onto that, Jim?
No, I think this one particularly kind of just highlights the students' need to have a really good understanding about the scope of their the scope of their responsibilities, but also within that those professional rules around kind of GDPR and sharing of information directly with patients, and what those schedules are within those different relationships. And I think particularly all of these scenarios really kind of ask the student to really take a step back and reflect on what their role is, and how do we put those things into words. I think there's a lot of layers of different things happening within these scenarios, which I think perhaps aren't obvious on face value, which is quite good.
And it's something we speak to the students about regularly. They are obviously on a biomedical science course, so it's something we delve through throughout their degree, as well as obviously employability skills generally. We speak about obviously what the role of a biomedical scientist is, what things are in place regulations-wise, laws-wise, that obviously they have to think about, which could come into play in a lot of different job roles, a lot of different courses as well, depending obviously what it is that the job might be. So that was the 3 scenarios. Obviously, if you have questions on them, please let us know at the end. I'm more than happy to go into a bit about them. Just before I delve into the results, I just wanted to chat a little bit about what feedback the students got. So what we did, both of us did, was we recorded some video feedback. So I recorded some clips of what I would have done in those situations as a biomedical scientist, and what the students should be thinking about in each of the scenarios. But I also did this as a written form as well, because I know that some students may prefer it written in front of them, some may prefer it audibly, but some also might like both. They might want to hear it, but also read it. So I wanted to give students kind of both of those general feedback. And obviously I gave them the opportunity to come and speak to me should they have further questions, which delves quite nicely then into the post results. So overall, the students found it really beneficial. They've enjoyed the activity, and they found that it definitely improved their communication skills. And they found overall it better prepared them for their placement year as a trainee biomedical scientist. Most of them did enjoy it and felt that overall each scenario was clear, that they understood what was being asked of them, you know, who was phoning, and obviously what the feedback meant. 80% of them overall did feel more confident confident dealing with the queries. However, there was still quite a proportion that still overall said they felt a bit uncomfortable and still had that anxiety around phone calls. This isn't unexpected. This is just one short activity. It's not going to immediately fix the issue, but it's at least getting students to think more about, okay, well, why might I be feeling anxious about a phone call? What is it that I'm struggling with? So what can I start to think about when I go into a workplace or when generally my phone starts to ring? It hopefully gets them to start reflecting on why am I feeling that and what could I be doing to improve it. 6% of them overall agreed that they still need to rehearse phone calls beforehand, which again isn't an uncommon thing with anxiety. They might feel that they need to be more prepared. So hopefully they found that this activity prepared them at least to understand what queries might come into the lab. So at least they might feel a bit more prepared for that. Some brief improvements students talked about was obviously helping them articulate responses better. It started to get them thinking more reflectively and overall helped them with thinking about and handling professional phone calls. In terms of obviously feedback from the students about what we could do to improve it, they talked about adding more scenarios, which there's certainly a never-ending bank of scenarios I probably can think of. Rewording some of the instructions and some of the feedback, which is perfectly fair. Obviously, the feedback was more general, and I can understand that for some students, some of it might maybe not been as clear, so that's something we can continue to work on. And overall, they would like more guidance. So overall, what should they be doing in terms of professional phone calls? Because this scenario where this activity was kind of on its own. We gave them obviously information about what it was about, why it was useful, and then got them to have a go. But obviously the students, have had a go and now, want some extra help or want to improve those skills further. Visually, I was just going to show some of these results. Obviously, we can see that overall, most of them found that the activity improved their communication skills, with only a small amount finding it didn't. And again, we come back to the statements. So you'll notice these statements are the same as earlier. And if I move to the next slide, you can see the pre and post activity changes. So for the top 4 questions, there was a little bit of change, maybe not as much as we would have liked. But we can still see some of it stays relatively the same. The only nice thing is we can see that maybe the answering the phone call anxiety does seem to go down a little bit, which is quite nice. But for the final 3 boxes, we can see quite a shift. That there is now, none of the students felt that they had no knowledge about how to answer a phone call professionally. So all of them are showing that they've started to understand that more. They've shown that they have a better understanding of what queries might come into a hospital and also generally what they can share with service users. So service users is a term we use for anyone that's using the NHS. So that could be GPs, doctors, and patients as well. So that could be anyone that is using the service, for lack of a better word. Anything you want to add on that, Jim?
No, I think that's fine, yeah.
So it was nice to see at least pre and post that there was a bit of a change. As I said, maybe not as much as we would have liked with the anxiety, but obviously it is one activity. Obviously we need more than that, but at least the students are starting to see, what might be causing it. And this was just a kind of a visual representation of what the students overall felt about the activity. So they felt that obviously it increased their confidence. It helped them with understanding what phone calls might come in the lab. It helped them with their quick thinking skills, which is obviously important in any job role, but particularly if a phone call has suddenly come in, it might be something quite serious that they might have to deal with. So the fact they can start thinking more quickly and also how to articulate themselves better is really good to hear. And speaking slower kind of comes into that as well. So it was really nice to hear that the students did find it useful. In terms of future plans, we're obviously going to continue to run it and continue to develop this activity. The results you've seen are from this year's cohort, but obviously we'll keep adding on to that each year as we keep improving it more. We want to look at running an in-person workshop, which will allow the students to ask more questions before doing the activity, but also allow them to perhaps have some practice time as well, whether with each other. We might look at actually getting a phone working within a room so they can hear how a phone call might work between myself and another colleague, and also between them and a colleague as well, so they can have a go as if it's a GP phoning them and have a little bit of a practice and see, understand more clearly what they should be doing, and maybe even, let each of them have a go so they can kind of improve the answers each time, which will then help them do the activity and hopefully gain more from it.
Yeah, we've talked about having a room with maybe adjoining rooms with two groups in, where one calls the other, and then they can hear the call and then build on each other's efforts each time. So by the time that they're kind of agreeing a kind of a structure to that phone call themselves naturally, which is kind of a nice way of approaching it, but also just keep running through those different scenarios to let them just kind of see that almost a flow chart through. If anyone's ever worked in a call center will know that we often used to get given call center flow charts of, if they say this, and if they say this and say this. I think it's building that confidence with our student groups, that they've got that internal flow chart in their heads ready to go, kind of when those scenarios are, that kind of leads them through those calls naturally, really.
Yeah. We'll obviously look at adding more scenarios as well. I didn't want to make it too big in the first few iterations, but obviously the students have asked for more, so I'm more than happy to give them some more scenarios to work through. Whether those will be used in more the workshop or they'll be put in the online version, we'll wait and see. We've also started looking at other softwares, such as the Blackboard AI roleplay. So Blackboard is something we use for modules, for lectures, for assessments. So it's something the students are very familiar with. And more recently, in their newer version, they have brought an AI roleplay version, a roleplay activity simulation that we can use as academics. So I've started to have a play around using that. It is, again, still not fully realistic to a phone call, but it definitely starts a conversation going rather than the students just recording a response. SimConverse is another one that is, again, more of a kind of a chat version. Currently, our pharmacy students use it when looking at, obviously, drug dispensing, things like that with patients. So again, that might be something in the future we'll look for. And Shortlist.me as well is another kind of interview platform that we might look into as well. So I had a bit of a play around on Blackboard. I have kind of for a little while now. And I took the scenario about the doctor, about the patient this time, and put that into Blackboard AI. So what you do is you obviously would give the students the role, what is the AI doing, and you tell the AI what the person they want it to play and what kind of they're looking for. And obviously then you can have a back and forth conversation with the AI, acting as the biomedical scientist, they act as the patient, the doctor, whoever you're asking them to. And it's a bit of a back and forth, and it allows the students to get real-time responses and think about, oh, well, this person's, they seem quite anxious, they don't know what to do, so how can I help them, calm them down, make them understand that I cannot help them, but this is what they need to do. So I had to go with the patient, I've had to go with the doctor as well, and the doctor definitely showed a lot of frustration, which was quite fun to play with. So it's certainly something that will be good for the students to play with once they get that up and running. So to conclude, the skills of our biomedical science trainees can't be assumed. As we've mentioned throughout this, students nowadays do not use phones in the same way we used to. They definitely look at using emails and messages and voice messages over phone calls on a daily basis. And that means that that skill is no longer there like it used to be. The fact that we can use this activity to expose students to these kind of scenarios and obviously challenge their critical thinking, their problem solving, and also kind of the quick thinking aspect is really important for their development as a person, but also as someone who's, a graduate that's going to go into employment in the near future. Skills like this, giving them scenarios that they can obviously base these things off, helps them in both their development and their employability, as I've said, but also just generally preparing them for a placement. So this could be, taken into any context, any course, to help students generally with improving that professional communication over the phone. So those verbal skills rather than the non-verbal ones. And overall, it's just, helping these students get prepared for their placement. They can talk about these things in interviews, which hopefully would give them an edge over other students in getting those placements, but also just generally showing them the realities of what an NHS workplace can be like. Anything you want to add on that, Jim?
No, I think from an employability perspective, this is a really one of those very clear wins for us, really, to help with really embedding skills development into curriculum, and I think it's something that really kind of stands us out. Aston's always had a very good focus on employability skills, but I think this is a real kind of true view of kind of the things that we're looking at trying to do, and many of these ideas actually comes from students and their own feedback and their own needs as well. So I think it just kind of really highlights that importance of listening to students and feeling out kind of where are the areas that they perhaps have a different view of things that we might have kind of perhaps taken for granted, being, you know, having to go through the process of phoning up your friends' parents to ask whether they're coming out, like perhaps we did when we were younger. You know, we've grown up using telephones in a way that that current generations just don't do, and we need to kind of slot in and provide some scaffolding around those skills. Which I think this has been a really useful project for that.
And I think that is everything. We've included our emails at the end, so please feel free to get in touch if you're not feeling through the recording, I should say. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. That was really lovely, and lots of I think lots of opportunity for us all to think about embedding some of this into our delivery. I've got a couple of questions, and then we've got, you know, there's 20 minutes left on the clock, so to speak, but we might finish a bit earlier. We'll see. But yeah, a couple of questions for me. So in a lot of accreditation criteria, whether that's professional body accreditation or, you know, RSB accreditation and so on, professional and graduate attributes and professional skills and employability skills are becoming more and more important in those criteria. So I was curious about how you think the future direction of this will go in terms of bringing this more into sort of summative, you know, summative assessments, and so we can actually tick those boxes for those criteria to be achieved. So this was a formative exercise. So a couple of things then. So how many of your students did it? I can't remember if I might have missed that bit, but did everyone participate in that? And how do you think that would alter if it became a more formative exercise? Do you think in order to do that, you'd have to bring in sort of more real world, maybe bring in some actual biomedical scientists who can act as, you know, the person calling up to give that more authentic kind of, this is a phone call that I had, this is how I dealt with it, and maybe try and practice that out with students. So going from that formative, how many students engaged with that formative, and then moving into more of a summative approach? Do you think that's a trajectory that we might be having to go down?
I think eventually, yeah. So as I said, we took it as placement preparation, which we already do quite a few workshops for that they have to attend. I'd obviously encouraged the students to do this, had pushed it on them. Unfortunately, this year, just due to workload, it got released a little bit later than I liked. So we had, I think it was a total of only 9 students out of the 38 that did it, which isn't bad. But obviously, when I released, it was midway through their term 2, so they were very busy. They were already thinking about their assessments and things like that. Had already done a lot of the placement prep that we do with them. They were, you know, going on to their mock interviews before they had actual interviews. So it was a little bit tricky this year, but I'm hoping to release it in term 1 next year to give them far more time, and also bring a sense of compulsory to it, that it goes towards this placement preparation, so they need to be doing it. In terms of summative assessments, I think it would be nice to bring it into that, and I think it might be nice to bring it into the biomedical science cohort in general, so not just placements, particularly because in our final year already we do NHS interviews as an assessment in their final year. So we use Interview 360. I think it's 10% of the module that we teach in final year. They do an interview that has been prepped with biomedical scientists in the hospital. So we already have kind of their input. So I think definitely having their input in it, getting them maybe to come to the workshop itself and talk about how they deal with phone calls on a daily basis. You know, running through an activity with them would certainly be really useful and help the students see, you know, how to keep calm in it, you know, how they deal with those phone calls day in, day out, and would definitely be useful, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So I have got lots of other questions, but I'd like to offer anybody else who has a question for Kathleen and Jim, please feel free to raise your hand, and we can go through the order, or the chat. Let me see if there's anybody on the chat. Anybody's got any questions? So I'll ask one more question whilst people are thinking about it. It does take a while for people to get warmed up with these things. So what was I going to say? So yeah, so obviously the reality is, of course, having that voice-to-voice phone conversation. A lot of the students, even at Warwick and other institutions, they often have, opportunities to practice with these things that are maybe not sort of voice-to-voice. Do you think that bringing that into play, so you're actually having a real proper phone call, would really improve that confidence and improve that kind of the reality of then dealing with those unexpected calls?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think the AI chat functions are really interesting ways to explore, but I think that voice on voice, voice to voice thing is the absolute essential for that to
Yeah.
be a full true replication of what you'd expect. I think that it's that unknown, that uncertainty around what the next thing is that somebody might say and how they say it is at the crux of it. The important skill set that's missing, rather than just responding in text. So
and it's the emotion behind. You can kind of tell how someone's feeling a little bit with the way they speak, but sometimes that gets misconstrued in text messages and emails and things.
indeed.
So professional communication in general is really, really important. So yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. Dudley, you have your hand up.
I do. Hopefully I'm
Yes.
not muted.
We can hear you.
Good, excellent, fantastic. Yeah, very interesting. We did a little while ago, probably a very long time ago, a whole load of interview prep, I think, for various students, and I got roped into a scenario that was particularly for biomedical students. And what I found very interesting is they had 3 different groups. I don't know whether you've done something similar to this. So yes, they had the online, responding to, a simulation of a call or something like that. They had actually someone calling or pretending to call. They had a simulator, but then they also had the same conversation face to face. And it was very interesting looking at the different responses depending on the scenario that the person was engaged in. And I'm sure you're very aware of this. Even with a face-to-face, or even with a AI bot, there's a different response to someone who you cannot see. All you can do is hear. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, when I've done telephone training, and particularly interview training around interviews on the telephone, I think kind of trying to do some work with how do students really exaggerate their meaning and kind of respond appropriately is definitely an important factor of that. When you can't see each other, that there can't be any assumptions made that the other person really understands what's happening. And I think kind of trying to get them to hear their own answers and to reflect on whether that's really effective has really been the key for me with interview preparation, particularly. It's surprising how much you need that physical aspect of somebody's face to understand what they're saying. And as my mum used to remind me, I wouldn't be able to talk without my hands. But on a telephone, nobody's going to see that. Nobody's going to communicate that. So how do you bring that across? And I think just generally communication training is needed across the board. I think, as Kathleen was saying, I think this project lends itself quite nicely into what we already have embedded within our final year practices, where we do some really detailed analysis of job specifications and interview preparation and other kinds of things. And then this could almost be the next stage in a mock interview process, where this is a mini selection kind of tool and other things as well that could be developed in there too. So I think there's definitely options to where we can put this in very different ways.
I mean, I think, just to very quickly add on to that, I think the one thing that really struck me when I was involved in this particular project I'm talking about was the students, or some students, not all of them, the students really were not able to, just based on voice alone, discern whether someone was really stressed, whether they were absolutely fine, or whether they really couldn't be bothered. And it was really obvious to me and several others, this is someone who's stressed. And when we asked the students, they thought no, they were fine.
Yeah. I think particularly from from an inequality diversity standpoint, and also with thinking about students with learning needs or other kinds of considerations as well. I think it's really important to identify those that might have alternative ways of approaching things and may not necessarily pick up on visual or audio cues in the same way as others. I think that's an interesting thing to kind of bring into this project, maybe. And how we kind of deal with that, or rather how we might need to do additional training with certain people to allow them to be a little bit more effective and join the workplace as effectively as other people.
One final quick thing is just the reason why I think this is such a good thing to do, of course, is that in one of the cohorts, the person was absolutely fine talking, in other scenarios. As soon as they got on the phone, they started stammering, and they've never stammered before in their life, and they were looking around as shocked as anyone. You're thinking, okay, well, that's something to work on.
Why it's so invaluable to give people that experience and to identify those sticking points and those things that they need to be a little bit more mindful about, or just consider when dealing with those things.
Yeah, brilliant.
Very good.
Giving students the opportunity to explore how they react in certain scenarios is vital, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Bill, I noticed you had your hand up. Do you still need?
Yeah, I had a few things that I'd just love to mention. First of all, back in a previous life, when I taught business English 30 years ago, we used, pre-internet, we used to have two rooms set up which were wired with real telephones, with handsets, and our students would need to come and practice their confidence just working with each other. It's amazing to see that these skills are still just as relevant now, and how different it is. When you split a bunch of students up, and instead of turning to their partner and sort of fake role-playing a conversation, you put them in different rooms, and suddenly, the whole scenario is very different. So I really love this project. My point actually was really from LearnSide, not as an edtech company, but as an employer. And we are a very much remote company. Our team is distributed all across the UK. And so we conduct our interviews by Google Meet, online. Obviously we can see people. So that adds, an element of potential stress for interviewees. But we're also, because we're a remote company, we're looking for the skills of communication, in this medium, not so much phone, but in this sort of, the video calls. I mean, we spend most of our days on video calls to each other and to customers and everything. So I think anything that you can do to improve the way in which students can perform in those and convince us that they can do a good job on that is so worthwhile. And our interview process is really straightforward. We are not looking to trip anyone up. We're not looking to trick anyone into giving us the wrong answers. We would love them to succeed, but very often, just through sort of a lack of experience, they're kind of looking the wrong way. They're sort of looking down. They're maybe not responding to the cues that you're giving them. So anything like this, I think, is so worthwhile in us supporting that generation of young people in particular, just moving into the workplace. So yeah, I'm sure that in your employability skills, you're also working on these kind of Zoom call skills as well.
Yeah, that comes into play in our final year. So the interview we spoke about is a remote interview. The students are given, I think it's 3 questions. They have multiple attempts to obviously re-record it, and then they watch it over with their personal tutor, and we discuss what they've done really well, what they could improve upon. We talk obviously about like the STAR technique, things like that. And I think you can definitely see the students that have never had interviews before. They're quite nervous. They stutter over their own words. They look like they're definitely reading off a script. Obviously, I know AI is a problem with that as well. And it's something I know in the mock interviews with the placements, we've had issues with students just, reading off a script, and we go, okay, pause a minute. I'm going to ask you a completely different question now that I didn't give you earlier. Let's see, real time how you deal with that, because obviously things can happen in interviews that you might not be prepared for. Maybe you say something that the employer goes, oh, that's really interesting. Let me ask more about it. And of course, they're like, wait a minute, I wasn't prepared for that. I thought you were going to ask me X, Y, Z questions. So it's definitely, it's a skill that we're constantly trying to improve in the students, get them to think about a lot more And obviously it comes into play in phone calls, but also in interviews, whether it is remote, whether it's a telephone interview or an in-person one, for sure.
Thank you. This is raising lots of ideas in my mind about how we could and should embed this into university teaching very, very early on. I think it needs to be introduced early on. There's a couple of comments in the chat, but I just want to touch on one of the concepts of this, which was just raised, which is about the impact of AI. So AI is taking away some of that skill of thinking for yourself in certain scenarios, in certain situations. And so when we are asking students to do presentations and so on and so forth, I suspect that AI has been used to help script, like you've said, and then students might learn the script or whatever else, no matter how hard we try. We try and move students away from using notes and so on, but that's probably helped them to get that started, which, okay, might be a good thing. But touch into something that one of the comments in the chat by Matt has said, that do you think this is something that needs to be addressed pre-university? And why do you think that particularly the audiovisual cues are no longer recognized as easily with many students? And so do you think that there's something that we need to actually increase with students coming into universities, doing more face-to-face, changing our assessment strategies so we do more face-to-face assessing in there, in person, where students get to do, don't have to go away and do loads of prep for things which they can use then AI for stuff, and try and think about our assessment strategies more broadly so that students are having to actually do that in person, face-to-face, workshop or presentation, which we can then assess them on that, and it may help them to develop these things. What do you think, that in terms of the AI, the pipeline of students coming in, and how we can maybe incorporate some of this better into our teaching and learning assessment strategies so that students become more used to this?
Yeah. AI is definitely a big thing. As an academic, I see it a lot. It's definitely something we see in, scripts, things like that. The way we've kind of looked at it in terms of kind of general assessments, we've tried to look at different presentation styles. So something like Pekakucha, and I'm probably pronouncing it really badly, is a Japanese style of presenting that they have 20 seconds per slide, and they have a total of, I think it's 20 slides. So they have to think of a narrative. They can only have a picture on the board. They can't bring in notes. So they've got to think about how they narrate that story. Obviously, if they miss something, they've just got to carry on and keep going. We've definitely introduced that in first year, and it seems to then start to help them think more about, okay, I'm presenting something, it's a story I'm trying to present. And they can obviously bring that into other things as well. A phone call is, in a very similar sense, a story that you're trying to get from someone or you're trying to give to someone. And it's about conveying that communication forward. So I think definitely AI is a big thing. It's here whether we want it to be or not. So I think having that kind of online element with this was quite useful at first, because the students did not know what scenario they were going to get. They were, they got, I think it's 30 seconds to read it. That's maybe enough time to quickly plop it into ChatGPT, but then you're not gaining anything from it. So I think the students could quickly realize actually they're not gaining anything from that. If this is going to be in their placement, they're going to be in a lab. They cannot access their phone. They cannot access Google, ChatGPT, things like that. They're going to have to do it themselves. So hopefully that puts that forward to them. Actually, yes, AI can be useful in certain senses. I'm not saying you can't use it. And we don't, say to our students, do not use it at all, but use it with a critical mind of it can be wrong. It can misunderstand what you're trying to tell, the same way, the students are misunderstanding how someone talks.
Yeah.
In terms of that, I definitely think the earlier the better. I think that face-to-face can certainly help that, that eye contact, speaking to people about it. Students generally have, I feel, are getting more anxious with presentations generally. So, if we can start bringing that in as early as possible, that certainly can help. I'm trying to think of what the other bit of the question was. I
think it's just more like, the pipeline of students coming in are going to possibly, whether or not we'll see these skills dropping a little bit. So at Warwick, we run like weekly tutorials where students are in small groups, and every week, for first years particularly, they're talking and going through data or whatever that tutorial is about. And it's just so valuable to keep hold of. And I know some of these tutorial systems have started to diminish a little bit because of the staff student ratio numbers and so on, but it's just so vital, isn't it, to have that small group ability for students to be talking and talking with academics, talking with each other, maybe swapping around to different academics and different student groups, but let's just hope we don't lose that opportunity a little bit, because bringing this kind of thing into the curriculum, we need to find space for this as well, I think, to make sure students are confident, as less anxious as they can be, which is difficult because there is a pressure on phone calls, particularly in these sort of scenarios. So yeah, what a great project. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've got a couple of minutes. Does anybody else have any questions or burning question that we to ask that we haven't really covered? Okay. If you do think, it was always, when you finish the call or when you walk out of the office, that's when you have the question, isn't it? So after we finish the call, if you do think of a question, please feel free to reach out to Kathleen or Jim, and we'll, hopefully that they can get in touch with you, or contact me, and then I can pass your details on, as I mentioned before. So, so we'll leave it there. Thank you to those attending for attending. Thank you for our presenters. What a fabulous talk and some great ideas that I certainly have now. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.